Welcome to Questrom Insights Live and the Susilo Institute for Ethics in the Global Economy webinar series. I'm Dave Epstein, Executive Director of the Susilo Institute, a part of Boston University Questrom School of Business, which examines issues and explores solutions to global ethical challenges in business. So by now, everyone has been wowed, perplexed, or terrified, or maybe all three, by demonstrated capabilities of generative AI like ChatGPT. By the way, we will use the terms ChatGPT, LLMs, large language models, chatbots, generative AI, all interchangeably. So those are just going to be kind of equivalents here. Businesses more than likely see these new capabilities as a natural progression of AI tools, which have been in use for years. Opportunities for productivity and efficiencies are plentiful, but how worried are they and us about the ethical implications of this ubiquitous use of generative AI and further advancements in AI technology? Salesforce has been known for its social responsibility under Mark Benioff's leadership. Unlike Google, Facebook, Twitter, and just recently Microsoft and Amazon's Twitch, Salesforce has decided that AI ethical oversight was not superfluous. Our guest, Yoav Schlesinger, embodies this role. Yoav is Salesforce's architect of ethical AI practice, where he helps the company embed ethical product practices to maximize the societal benefits of AI. Prior to Salesforce, Yoav was a founding member of the Tech and Society Solutions Lab at Omidyar Network, where he launched the Responsible Computer Science Challenge and helped develop Ethical OS, a risk mitigation toolkit for product managers. Before that, he brought to bear his Stanford undergraduate work in religious studies, political science, and international security in a more than 15-year career as a consultant leader, and two-time founder of mission-driven social impact organizations. Yoav makes his home in Marin County, California, where he can be found on the trails of Mount Tamalpais with his family and his dog. Yoav, I didn't get the name of your dog yet. Do you have the name of your dog?
His name is Cedar, and he's an Australian Shepherd.
Australian Shepherd, great. So smart dog too. Okay, so joining Cedar and Yoav and me is Professor of Business Ethics Tae-Hwan Kim from Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business. Tae-Hwan has a PhD in business ethics from Wharton, is widely published in many top-tier journals, and has been on the editorial boards of journals such as Business Ethics Quarterly, the Journal of Business Ethics, and Business and Society Review. He also serves on prestigious committees such as the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems. Tae-Hwan wrote a chapter of the book Robot Ethics 2.0, along with contributing to other titles. He loves riding road and mountain bikes, singing songs with his kids, playing with his 3-pound Yorkie. And the name there?
His name is Max.
Max, okay. We got a few different dogs that we got. Anyway, so please use the Q&A tab to ask questions. We'll save time at the end for as many as we can get to. Please feel free to use the chat function otherwise. So let's get started. Welcome, Yoav and Tae-Hwan.
Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So Yoav, maybe we just start with your role at Salesforce. So, our architect is an interesting, architect of AI ethics actually is an interesting title. Maybe you can just tell us kind of both what kind of work do you do and how big your team is and what kind of influence you have on the way Salesforce operates, conducts their business.
Sure. So I sit in Salesforce's Office of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology. Our office was set up in 2018 to engage employees, stakeholders, and the range of diverse constituencies across Salesforce and beyond in our customers, our partner communities, et cetera, to think about the ethical development and deployment of our technologies. So I technically sit within a practice we call our ethics by design practice, which is embedding ethical principles and practices as default states for the products that we deliver to our customers. We also have a policy function, which sets guidance and guardrails in terms of customer use cases, what are allowed and disallowed uses of certain products. So for example, Salesforce early on made a decision not to allow the sale of automatic weapons or its accessories on the Salesforce platform. And so our policy team works on that. I sit in our ethical AI practice in our product organization. So I interface in a cross-functional way with all of our business units, effectively. We call them clouds, but they are things like service, sales, marketing, health, verticals where we have customers, et cetera. And I work with engineers, designers, data scientists, lawyers, the whole range of folks in Salesforce to help our teams embed guidance, guardrails, mindful friction, and other ways of helping our customers do the right thing. Make it very easy for them to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. And that's kind of the mindset that I hopefully bring to that product development function in the organization.
Well, that's pretty fascinating. I'm actually glad to hear also that you have a larger organization that's you're part of as well. So just a follow-up on that. How do you control what your users do? That is that, are you watching their data and how they use it? And tell me about the privacy and how you find out that somebody's using it for weapons development or for some other type of maybe less ethical things that you don't want to get involved with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at Salesforce, we don't have access to our customers' data. There's a very strong wall between all of the data that they have about their end users, customers, et cetera, and we don't see it. We don't have access to it. It is entirely walled off from us. What that means is that the answer to your question, Dave, is very hard. We don't know how our customers are necessarily deploying an AI model unless we hear it through one of our team members, a solution engineer or an account executive who might come to us and say, look, I have this customer who's considering doing X, Y, and Z. What do you all think about that? In which case we can engage with the customer to help guide them and make smart decisions, ethical decisions, responsible decisions. But at the end of the day, we don't control it. We're a platform, an infinitely customizable platform, in fact. And what that means is that our responsibility is that much greater to build responsible, ethical, accurate models in the first place before they get into our customers' hands. Because again, we don't want to hand them a loaded weapon. We want to give them a way to do the right thing and to make smart decisions.
Yeah. Sounds like quite a challenge a little bit. So Taewon, maybe you can kind of just give us you've been working with a lot of companies. How does Salesforce compare with other companies that maybe you've seen or other initiatives or, what Yoav said, how does that look to what you've studied and looked at?
I guess Salesforce is distinctive in ethical AI, at least in two manners from other companies. I'm not saying other companies are all entirely evil, but I can see that Salesforce is different. So first, I think two manners. So one is motivation. The second one is how much emphasis the company can actually invest in the ethics. So about the motivation part is the most companies, probably even Salesforce have some instrumental approach to AI ethics, meaning that we want to take ethics seriously to the extent that doing so is financially good for the company. So that's fine. And for-profit companies, they are driven and should be driven by profits, and by doing so, they can contribute to the welfare of society. But at the same time, based upon the testimony from Yoav, I can see that they have some strong motivation behind the finance that do the right thing. So somehow, regardless whether doing ethical operation is going to make economic sense or not in the short term or long term, I think they have some good idea about why we are doing this, because this is the right thing to do. And that's my idea. The second point I want to make is consistency. So it's some other companies, I have to make some examples. Microsoft, or for instance, Twitter, they lay off the ethics teams, just in one day. So that is very contingent matter. So based upon the context, based upon the financial or budget wise, they make a decision whether to keep ethics or not. And then whenever they need to cut budget, they find out the easiest department they want to cut it off, and then that is ethics to them. And then probably from Salesforce's perspective, they want to see some consistency, some consistent, sustainable operation of it. I think I like the two ideas behind the Salesforce. Probably there must be some wrong things and bad things at Salesforce too.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing. I think that one of the things that we all kind of raise our eyebrows at is why, Microsoft and Google and even Amazon has decided that it's a good time to lay off these oversight committees. And while at the same time, they're all saying that they care about ethics, they care about doing the right thing and that kind of stuff. And so, and Salesforce has gone through a layoff as well. But maybe, Yoav, you can tell me, why are you safe, and what is there a difference in thought, and do you have any kind of, I'm not asking for inside information, but information about how you think of Microsoft and Google's process of doing the right thing but not having an oversight committee?
I can't really speak for other companies. I can say that, to Taewon's point, Salesforce is an authentically mission and values driven organization. Yes, we have the profit motive, but our core corporate values show up in everyday conversation. Trust is our number one value. And we as an ethics team can actively lean on our discussion of trust in conversations, and everyone at the organization knows and understands what we're talking about. When people are setting their goals and objectives for the year, everyone's first method of achieving their objectives has to be a trust measure. And so in some ways that's security, in some ways that can be other kinds of things, but ethics makes its way into trust very easily. And so I think I have job security, I'm knocking on wood right now, because Salesforce does believe this. And here I'll make a hard pivot, Dave, into one of the things that we're talking about here in this conversation. With the embedding of more and more complex AI into our products, it's more critical than ever that we do this work. That the narrow AI models that we've deployed over the last 6 or 7 years are being rapidly replaced by generative models, which have a whole range of new considerations for our product teams, for the folks both building and using different models. And so my team is very busy right now as well.
Well, that's a great pivot in a way. Maybe you can kind of inform us a little bit. I mean, here in academia, we see ChatGPT and those tools being used to write papers and hand in homework, and we don't know exactly how to handle it, to be honest. And of course we want to encourage it. At the same time, we don't want them to use it as kind of plagiarism. But in business, you guys have been using AI tools in different ways. Maybe you can you inform us a little bit about where generative AI, ChatGPT, is used both in your products and or people who are at the company and maybe some insight as to what the customers are doing with it and how that interacts with business? Because that's kind of a little bit of a black box for everybody about how it's being used and, productivity that's coming out of it.
Sure. Well, we have a mandate for people not to go and use their own instances of ChatGPT to submit proprietary data and information to that model for training and retraining. So no one should go and put Salesforce data into ChatGPT for all sorts of reasons you can imagine. That said, we are building, given our role, we're building systems that essentially give an assist to a human who needs to be in some way more productive, more efficient, et cetera. So let me give you some examples from our use case. So if you are a customer service agent on the phone with an end user and you'd like to very quickly summarize the call, which customer service agents do, and commit something to a knowledge base, et cetera, a generative AI model can very quickly summarize a call and commit that to a knowledge base and really make that service agent much more effective and efficient. Same for a sales representative at a company who's generating, emails all day long for reaching out to cold prospects, for following up with people, et cetera. And so spinning up tailored and personalized emails so that they solve the blank page problem over and over and over again is a great use for our product. You can also imagine, if you are a commerce platform, so you're making sales online, our product could be used to generate product descriptions very easily. So rather than having to go and craft 2,000 different product descriptions for each item in your catalog, generative AI can be used to power that kind of work. So the things that we are doing all have a human in the loop. At this point, we really think that that's a critical element until these systems are proved to be more accurate, safe, and honest, that a human is able to review and approve the results of the model before sending it to an end user. But those are the kinds of things that we're building today to, rather than replace people, augment their capabilities.
Okay, so I think that some of those examples are really great. Summarizing perhaps a phone call and breaking it down into some of the essence of what was going on, maybe even capturing some of the emotion is pretty good with generative AI. It seems to be getting better with that, and that's for internal use. How do you feel about, or how do you think your customers feel if they're receiving and looks like a personalized email that was created by generative AI? I mean, is there any worry about, customers feeling like, yeah, this wasn't very personal, although it sounded personal, but it just feels differently? And then I have another follow-up question, but how do you feel about the interaction with customers not appearing personal, but isn't?
Yeah, so to be clear, what we would be talking about is a sales rep at Acme Corp who's using our product to generate emails for their sales needs, right? So what we would be talking about here is, some element of watermarking, perhaps, right? That indicates that some piece or all of the content that's being delivered has been generated by an AI system. Certainly, if we remove the human in the loop, that human reviewer, we think that's absolutely essential. That a bot not pretend to be a human, that an image that's been created by a generative image model be watermarked, et cetera. To the extent that there is a human reviewing that content, I think that requirement, if you will, is eased somewhat in that there is hopefully meaningful review of the content before it goes to a person. And therefore, it's really doing that assist rather than the replacement. And so I think that we absolutely want to give the emailer visibility into where the content came from its accuracy or confidence scores, right? Elements that give the emailer the ability to know where this email is generated from before they send it to the end user.
Yeah, that's interesting. A little bit of us becoming, or humans becoming the editors for the bot instead of them becoming the editors for us. That's an interesting. So Taewon, maybe you can fill in a little bit of what you've seen the use in business and how does that play out as far as how people deal with customers or deal with outside people versus the inside, making people more efficient.
I don't see any clear indication that companies already are using ChatGPT or in similar techniques because they don't say they use it, and then but I can see that we've been, all the users have been interacting with products, at least in part generated by some non-human techniques for the last at least 20 years actually, not just in 1 year. As for when you go to airport, sometimes you hear a humans making a sound that, hey, this is last call, AA American Airline to the gate 13. In other times, actually, it is automated audio. It just sounds like human. They just type, the human behind the audio system type what is going to sound, but it is audio system. And then related to this is many chatbots or language models, also can have dictation function. So it's a reading the text, and you can choose what kind of accent you want to use, British accent or American accent, for instance. They wouldn't use Texan accent, for instance. So, and also according to psychological research, human beings are more easily convinced by British accent than American accent. So that is why we often see advertisings with the British accent. And so that's another kind of thing that we use. But ChatGPT, I think, is revolutionizing the business world. Not because the technology is spectacularly new. People working on this area have been using similar techniques all the time. But I think ChatGPT is revolutionizing because it has made a very accessible interface with ordinary people. So ordinary people can now use ChatGPT. It's very easy and accessible. So now everybody can see how remarkable it is. But even before the launching of ChatGPT, people used to be using, for instance, GPT-3, GPT-2, or any chatbot based upon deep learning, which is the same. So the base technique of ChatGPT is deep learning. It can be used to face recognition. It can be used to large language model. It can be used for many other things.
So that's kind of interesting. So maybe you can tell us, has GPT-2 and 3 been used? Or is it, because I think that the public is just totally surprised that once ChatGPT-3 came out and once, OpenAI and now Microsoft has embraced it, and all of a sudden people are using it all over the place. And that's just as of November of 2022. Has it been used kind of, is it no surprise to internally to, you weren't developing AI, so you would be a user of it. Is it totally new and everybody figuring out how many different things they could do now? Or was it kind of, is this just evolving It's kind of normal business.
I think that in academic research settings and contexts, in corporate research, in a variety of AI labs, et cetera, Taewon's right. This has not been a surprise. And anyone who knows and watches AI development has seen the acceleration of the development of these kinds of models over the last few years, has been routinely working to deal with issues like bias and toxicity in large language models, et cetera. And that's not new. The wide, public, and very fast embedding of these models into products at scale has accelerated massively in those last 5 or 6 months that you're talking about, Dave. I do think that the enterprise was somewhat surprised. And every CEO who does not spend their time reading archive AI papers was on the phone the next day saying, how do we get this into our products? Because that broad awareness and easy accessibility of just one UX feature that's a chat box to enter text just blew people's minds. And I do think that it was somewhat of a surprise for a lot of players in that space.
So on the ethical side of things, how about job replacement? So, you mentioned maybe you can start writing some of your manuals for you. So that might mean that you don't need as many people writing manuals. You can imagine it's writing some emails for you. Maybe you're much more efficient as a salesperson. So maybe you don't need as many salespeople because people can handle more of it. I think that we didn't really talk too much about the generation of graphics, but yeah, I've even used it to create some graphics that maybe I would have used a graphics artist, but it's not that important to me that I just need a graphic kind of thing. So I quickly run through 10 different things on DALL-E 2 or Midjourney, and all of a sudden I don't need to send it out. So how do you feel, and is there any thought process that maybe we're replacing some of the jobs that we just don't need? I mean, you had a layoff, so maybe this is helpful to you, but so let's talk about the ethics of it, maybe. I don't know. And
yeah,
I'd like both hear both Taewon and what you think about that.
I'd love to hear from Taewon on this, but I'll say two things quickly. One is, let's get real. This is going to fundamentally change the way people work, right? And there is going to be disruption as a result of that in knowledge work. People, for the last 75 or 80 years or so, since the end of World War II, the main objective in American life has been to go to college, get a white collar job, sit at a desk, make a good living, right? That's been the dream, not to work in, a manufacturing plant, not to work in meat packing, et cetera. I think we're about to see over time, not today, but what I'm calling the blue collar inversion. Basically, if you don't do something with your hands, you stand the risk of being not entirely replaced, but made redundant. I don't know exactly what to think about it, right? But there is good reason. My kids are 7 and 9, so I think about this in terms of what will they do, and it occurs to me like maybe they should be plumbers who really know how to use GPT to give them instructions on how to replace a pipe fitting, right? Because we have not and will not solve for a great amount of time the interaction of an AI model with the physical world, right? That connection is a long way off. And so to the extent that people have a connection with the physical world, they will not be replaced. And we're on the precipice of massive disruption in any number of knowledge work industries.
Yeah. Taewon, what do you think?
I believe almost everything you have said is going to be true. And I think we need to, as society, think about what responsibilities corporations have, because corporations are those who create jobs and can have the entity that has the ability to increase or decrease the number of jobs, actually. Set aside the governmental regulations. And I strongly believe that meaningful life is very important goal of anyone. And then meaningful work is very important part of meaningful life. And then if we want to have a meaningful work, there must be work. I'm not saying that employed work is the only type of work, but realistically in our society, employed work has a distinctive role. And so employed work is going to have important role for us to live a meaningful life, unless we have capacity to dramatically change our culture, civilization, and social norms in a very short period of time. Let's say that it will take 100 years. Then in the meantime, we will face some meaning crisis, during which we need to find out where to find the place I can work. By doing so, I can make relationships and I cultivate my excellence. And that's one thing. But it is another matter whether automation is going to be really ending up with job replacement, because there are many other things, factors need to be considered. For instance, cost. So let's say once we have a little bit more sophisticated and developed ChatGPT and some other techniques, probably we can automate paralegal system. It's very similar to the writing and summarizing, and it's what paralegals do. However, we need to think about between robots and paralegals, which one is more costly. That's an important factor, actually. But the one thing I think professors used to have, I never experienced this, professors used to have typewriters before, and then the invention of LaTeX, typewriters just lost their jobs. And then Microsoft Word processor, some other typewriters lost their jobs. But still, university had a bunch of jobs. And ATM machines, many people were worried about ATM machines because that machine would cut the jobs of bankers. However, we now have many more numbers of bankers. So, but one thing I'm pretty much worried about ChatGPT and many similar things is that usage of ChatGPT is very cheap. You can just pay a couple of dollars to use ChatGPT for a couple of weeks, so it's very cheap. So compared to Boston Dynamics robots, which is about $20,000, this is very cheap. So that is one thing we need to pay attention to.
I think that's a great point, is that ChatGPT, generative AI, and some of these other AI programs really are very wide, have very wide uses. So you're not just replacing a typewriter with this AI, but you're replacing 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 or 50 different kinds of functions that can be done. So you're already going to have the tools in-house that can be applied to a lot of different things. And I think, I tell you one, I think I also kind of resonate with the idea that the Industrial Revolution took a long time. Relatively, it took a while. And when you build an automated machine, it takes people to build those machines, and they're costly, as you say. So it takes a while to replace the people that these will replace, but a lot of jobs were being created at the same time. It's a little harder to see what jobs are being created here. I mean, I think that maybe we're just being blind by maybe there are a lot more jobs that are going to be created, but it's not obvious what those are. I mean, before Industrial Revolution, it was obvious that we need people to build this equipment, and and there's a whole lot of supply things that you need to do and operations that you need to do in order to deliver that equipment, and yeah, it moves. But here it doesn't. When you're starting to replace knowledge workers, it's a little bit more difficult to see what gets replaced. There's only a certain number of people that are needed to build AI systems, and that's what it is. So on that, maybe you can kind of address the problem that the AI systems that we are using are being created by OpenAI, Google are the only two ones that are really out there now. I'm sure that Meta is going to come up with something. I'm sure that Apple is going to come up with something, maybe a couple of others, but it's going to be a handful. Is there a concern that this is a very concentrated set of tools that are coming from just a couple of companies? Is there any concern about that?
Yes, business ethics researchers have been concerned about the so-called argocracy. It's rather than democracy, it is argocracy. So algorithms make a decision about what we should do and what is allowed, what is not allowed. And then, as David, you said, there are only a handful of companies are using have the capacity access to the important algorithms, making impact upon how humans behave. That does not mean that we don't have any freedom, we don't have any consciousness. Nonetheless, it is true that we have been influenced, affected by targeted advertising. For instance, we all the time see targeted advertising in Facebook. We think that's I never pay attention to that. That's not true. We've been influenced. Otherwise, companies would not invest in that technology.
Yeah, I love it. Nobody pays attention to it, but somehow they're selling a lot of things, and we all get influenced by it. Yes. So, Yoav, is there a concern like inside a Salesforce that now you're dependent on a couple of other companies to do this? That is knowledge based, coming in and maybe being. We don't know if they're biased or influenced by a profit motive that may not be in alignment with what you think you're doing.
Sure. Look, I mean, OpenAI started as a nonprofit, and
that didn't last long, did it?
Right. Very, very quickly pivoted to taking quite a few billions of dollars of investment. We are not reliant on those models. So for us, that's the good news. We have the capability and the capacity to build our own generative AI models. So our approach is actually going to be ultimately something like a bring your own model approach. So a customer will be able to choose OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, Salesforce, Lambda, pick your model and plug it into your instance and run whatever the product is based on the model of your choosing. That will give our customers a lot of flexibility. And, certain of those models are probably better at performing certain tasks than others. Some of those models have more product safeguards in terms of the kinds of responses that they will put out, as well as the kinds of prompts they will take in. And different work has been done to red team and debias and mitigate toxicity in different kinds of models at different levels, et cetera. So there is definitely an AI arms race on. The concentration is certainly an issue because of the costs of development. Right. Although there's a Stanford lab that has recently developed a very small LLM at a very, very low cost. I can't remember the specific amounts, but it was extraordinarily low. So I think there will be a growing democratization of some of this as we progress. But at this point, there are just a few large players. And, it's one of the reasons that the letter requesting a pause on the development of these models by some folks and luminaries who signed it, had me looking very askance, because from my perspective, all that would have served to do is to consolidate the power of those who already have models in the market, and prevent that democratization that I think ultimately will benefit all of us as more and more models are built and developed. So I could talk at great length about that particular letter and the issues I think it raises, but all of that is to say, in specific answer to your question, Dave, yeah, I think we're all thinking about that.
That letter, I guess the first response by many of us was it was generated by people who were behind a little bit and they wanted somebody else to slow down the major guys so that they could catch up. But I think that whole idea of slowing it down, actually, there's a question in the chat, in the Q&A that kind of goes to this a little bit, and that is from Neuro asks, are there any government bodies that are overseeing the usage or tracking AI utilization in terms of harmful content search? Or are there any plans in Congress? I mean, is there any kind of is there any government oversight that's kind of coming in on this? And that letter kind of was asking for that, right? But is there any? What do you think about government oversight, government regulation, and possibilities that are coming down the pike?
Yeah, so let me see if I can do the primer on global AI regulation in 2 minutes or less. Good luck to me. There are emergent efforts globally to either regulate or govern or set in place frameworks or principles for how AI should function. So you've got principles and frameworks from the government of Singapore, from Canada, from the EU with the emerging EU AI Act, et cetera, and lots of different efforts emergent. I think there are at last count more than 200 different statements of principle and these kinds of frameworks that have been articulated both from the private sector, the public, NGOs, the OECD, et cetera. In the EU specifically, and in China, there are actually laws being worked through that govern how these systems function, what their obligations are, what kind of transparency and data maintenance practices they have, debiasing, et cetera, et cetera. As you can imagine, China and the EU's regulations look vastly different from one another. And then lastly, in the United States, because of the partisan gridlock in Congress, there's not a lot of hope for federal regulation of AI specifically, although there have been introduced some data privacy kinds of regulations that would absolutely have extension into the world of AI, but would be targeting more around data practices, data usage, et cetera, in kind of the same way that GDPR in the EU has. Given that partisan gridlock, I'm coming up on the 2-minute mark. Given that partisan gridlock in Congress, the majority of the regulatory oversight and concern in the United States has been from agencies. So you've got the FTC, which has made some statements about businesses' use of AI. You've got things emergent from municipalities like New York City, which has a regulation on the books now that will soon take force around the use of algorithms in hiring. And so a lot more enforcement coming from agencies, which have a sort of more nimble approach oftentimes to being able to tackle certain narrow problems, given that the United States is going to be a long laggard on federal regulation of AI.
Yeah, I want to hand it over to you, Taewon, in a second, but are they really enforceable? I mean, how do you know that a company is not using AI to do hiring? And isn't that a kind of a reactive thing after the fact rather than being able to say that you can't use it? I mean, or do they depend on whistleblowers to say, hey, they're cheating?
Yeah, it depends on the specific regulation, right? So if you look at the EU AI Act, for example, they take a risk-based approach to AI systems. So they ban the use of AI in certain use cases, say the use of facial recognition in the public space by other than law enforcement, say. They have high risk use cases with certain sets of obligations, medium and low risk. And those are enforceable, absolutely, because what will be required of the companies is a public repository of their AI systems that can be interrogated by consumers, that can be accessed by them. That consumers will be given the right to explainability. So if a decision is reached by an AI system, they will have the right to inquire how that decision was reached. So it shouldn't require whistleblowers or rely on whistleblowers, but rather create a relatively strong, robust enforcement regime in the same way that the GDPR did.
Hey, Juan, what do you think about regulation? And I think that one of the interesting things that Yoav just brought up also was the transparency ability of explainability. AI, I think that's some of the stuff that you've been working on as well. Is it going to be completely possible to do the explainability, or is that going to kind of hobble the usefulness of some of these models?
Please allow me to a little bit comment about the governmental regulatory approach first, and then there is no single governmental entity that controls AI risk, and I don't think that we don't need anything like that. And then I don't think anything like that, even if can solve all the problems. So it is always the evolution of regulations are it's a patchwork. So if Facebook is involved with discriminatory AI, then discrimination law, it's basically DOJ, will work on that. And it has a finance problem, then SEC will work on that. So, but the problem is two things, as you have, and David, you also mentioned that there is no transparency between these governmental entity and the corporation, because unless corporation expose that we did something wrong here, there's no good way for government to look into what's going on. Why? Because it is new technology that only some people can understand. And then if government wants to know what's going on inside this model, then they need to hire people with CS PhD, but they are very expensive. So they don't go to government, they go to Google. So therefore, realistically, it's extremely difficult for government to identify what's going on, but they have some techniques. So based upon the outcomes, they can infer there must be something wrong here. So that is a thing. But the second thing I wanted to mention is that we should not be trapped by what I call compliance trap. The compliance trap is that corporations' responsibility is they just do whatever they want to do inside the well-established, clear-cut set of rules. But there is no such thing. Laws are always incomplete. Governments always are not useless, but helpless. So therefore, unless corporations take initiative, maybe like Salesforce, to do the right thing for the sake of itself, we're not gonna see much progress. So it is really corporation and business people's responsibility. That's one thing. And the explainability, that's another issue. For instance, deep learning is not explainable, meaning that it is black box model. We know it is end-to-end model, so we know the inputs and we know the outputs, but nonetheless, we don't know the process. So sometimes we need to know what the process is, but not always we need to know the process. For instance, suppose that we developed an AI-powered predictive system about early warning system in ER. And then we don't know why this AI end up with this prediction, which is say they giving another fluid to this patient. Otherwise, this patient we're going to have a septic shock. And let's say that we don't know, the process, but here's input and here's output. And then with some processes, it's been certified by FDA, meaning that its accuracy is very high. then there are two options. We don't certify this AI until we know the process. Second, we just certify because it is safe, no side effect, but saved life. Then not necessarily we need to have reason to look into insight, but outcome is fine. However, there are some other circumstances. For instance, Tesla hit a pedestrian, and suppose that the Tesla was used by a very black box model. And then from a criminal laws perspective, we need to know whether the incident was made by negligently, accidentally, recklessly, or intentionally. Based upon the mindset or mental states of so-called of the black box, the penalty will be determined.
Yeah.
So to do so, we need to think about the explainability.
Yeah, this could be a full topic in itself, of course, because this is really complex, and we know government regulation is too slow to respond to the speed at which things are changing also. And I'm not sure that explainability is going to be that useful if it comes in and says, okay, here's the million steps that we took to come up with this solution. Who's going to read the million steps and decide that that was okay, or find the needle in that haystack to find out where maybe it went wrong? So it's fascinating the way it is. I have a lot of questions. Clearly, we're not going to get to all of them, but let me ask one that Yoav, you brought up a little bit, and Ahmed asks, what would happen if data from someone at company XYZ inputs into ChatGPT some sort of things? Does it become public property? You kind of mentioned about IP. People may be using putting in their email, and it exposes all kinds of intellectual property, but it's gone into training data. What happens? What's the thought process? How do you protect data, and does everything become public now?
I don't know if it becomes public, but it definitely becomes the property of OpenAI. So
there you go.
One should be very careful about what one chooses to put into a chat at this point, because whatever goes in is used by OpenAI to train and retrain their model, to refine it, to fine-tune it, to improve it, etc. So what that means is that it's not public per se, but the generative practices that model engages in could use that information for future recommendations. So if I am, I don't know, make something up. If I am Nike, right, or an employee at Nike, and I've input a lot of, plans for Nike's, entry into a new market, and I'm trying to summarize that and generate responses or whatever, that data could be used when an employee at Adidas does the same thing and says, spin me up a business plan for entrance to this new market. And so that competitors' data would be used as part of the training corpus on which that new generative output was trained. So, caveat emptor. Use at your own risk.
Very, very complex kinds of decisions. And of course, on the legal side of things, is it plagiarism? Is it not plagiarism? And how do you prove it one way or the other? Which is, and these generative AI models are good enough that it takes from all kinds of sources. So actually bringing it back to one particular source is very difficult. I mean, you can hire people from another company, and they will use kind of the information, not on purpose, but they will use their training to come up with that new sneaker, if you will. But here, that's kind of what the AI is doing, except that it's getting inside information and it doesn't have any kind of rules around use of it or not. It's just kind of very interesting. Well, I'm really sorry that I can't get to all the different questions that have come up. I mean, they're really great questions, but please send messages to us. But right now, let me just ask for final thoughts from each of you. Just what should we take from this conversation? Maybe kind of 1 minute each. So Taewon, what do you think people should take away from this conversation?
It is a golden age to ethics. We have problems, so it is the right time to think about ethics. So ethical is the new black. That's my recommendation.
I like that.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with Taewon. This is actually the most enthusiastic I have been as someone who does responsible or ethical AI, in that the introduction or the wide adoption of these technologies has been paired and accompanied by serious conversations about these ethical issues. They have come as sort of a unit for the first time. You know, the ethics of these systems in the past has been an ancillary conversation, something reserved for the Fairness and Accountability and Transparency AI conference, but not part of the societal conversation about these things. And seeing that ethical is the new black is actually very heartening. We have lots and lots of work to do. This is not going to be an easy or smooth next few years for those being in the trenches of using and deploying AI, but it's very exciting.
That's a great way to end this. I think that it's wonderful to hear the positiveness around that. Not only positiveness around the maybe use of these tools, but also that we are talking a lot about the ethics. And thank you, Yoav, for being in that position, and thank you to Salesforce for actually supporting it. And so I want to thank both of you for a great conversation. It went way too fast. I kind of feel like there's just so much meat here to talk about. But a thank you very much to both Taewon and to Yoav. I want to mention the next webinar is titled Whistleblowers. So we actually mentioned that here a little bit, but these are capitalism's protectors. And we're going to have Stephen Cohn, a renowned attorney responsible for more than $10 billion worth of whistleblower judgments. And he's going to give us some insights into the opportunities and perils of the action, and celebrating those selfless people that are really our heroes in fighting corruption and doing what's right and the ethical thing, just similar to what we're talking about here. We also will have an attorney and Professor Eric Bachman-Hitchings, who will join us along with Tyler Schultz. You might remember him as the Theranos whistleblower. He's going to join us in that same thing. So please register for that and other upcoming events at insights.bu.edu, and enjoy our Insights podcast as well that dissect some of the current topics in business. Thank you very much all for coming, and thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you.